The meeting room was alive with chatter when I noticed my phone light up with a call from Dylan. I stepped into the corridor, expecting the usual. "How was your trip? When are you coming home?" Instead, Dylan's tone was icy and self-assured as he declared, "I'm divorcing you." He added, "I already sold the condo, so you better start planning where you'll live." For a moment, I was stunned. The sheer nerve and lack of remorse made it almost laughable. My grip on the phone tightened as his words sank in. "You sold the condo?" I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," he replied dryly. "And I needed the cash to kick off a new life with Ava. She deserves more than a cramped space anyway." Hearing Ava's name stung, though I had suspected something was off for months. Dylan's late nights, unexpected business trips, and growing distance had all hinted at someone else. But to hear him mention her, as if I were just a nuisance in their world, ignited anger inside me. I calmly replied, "All right, sounds good," refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing me break down. "My name is Zoe, and until that call, I believed I'd married a man I could trust. Dylan and I had been together for 6 years, and even though our relationship wasn't perfect, I truly thought we were partners. We'd worked hard to buy our cozy 2-bedroom in the city, a place I'd fallen for at first sight. It wasn't merely a building. It symbolized everything we had built together. At least, that's what I thought. The rest of the day blurred into a series of client meetings as my mind raced. Dylan assumed he'd won, that he could take away the home I loved and disappear without a trace. But there was one detail he overlooked. The property deed had been solely in my name for months. I'd arranged to have it transferred right after our refinancing earlier in the year, a step Dylan agreed to without much thought because it lowered our interest rate. He never bothered to check the fine print or ask any questions about the paperwork he signed. His carelessness was about to backfire. By the time I got back to my hotel, shock had turned into determination. I wasn't going to cry or plead with him. If Dylan wanted to fight, he'd get one, and I was sure I'd come out on top. My first call was to Mia, my lawyer and longtime friend. I explained everything in detail, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "He sold the condo," Mia repeated, incredulous. "Does he even know he can't do that without your say-so?" "Apparently not," I replied, a touch of amusement in my tone. "He's already blown the money on his new life with Ava." Mia laughed dryly. "Well, he's about to get a rude shock. The sale is null and void. You can prove you're the sole owner, and if he's taken any funds from the buyer, he's facing fraud charges." That word, fraud, sent a rush of satisfaction through me. "What's our next move?" I asked. "First, we notify the buyer that the sale isn't legal," Mia said. "Then we send Dylan a formal letter detailing the consequences if he tries any further tricks. We'll drag him to court." After hanging up, a surprising calm washed over me. Dylan thought he'd outsmarted me, left me helpless and scrambling. In reality, he'd just set himself up for a major downfall. For the rest of my trip, I focused on my work, compartmentalizing my emotions and channeling my energy into my tasks. The betrayal hurt, but the idea of reclaiming my life and watching Dylan's smug look crumble gave me a fierce sense of purpose I hadn't felt in ages. Boarding the flight home, I felt ready to confront Dylan, dismantle his lies, and start a fresh chapter without him. It wasn't just about winning, it was about taking back control. The hours on the plane gave me time to reflect on how everything had unraveled. Dylan's arrogance was astounding. He hadn't even tried to hide his deceit, as if I were just another obstacle on his way to freedom. But instead of boiling over with rage, I focused on my plan for when I got back. Dylan thought I was powerless, not realizing I'd been playing the long game all along. As soon as the plane landed, my first move was to call Mia. "I'm home," I said while dragging my suitcase off the baggage carousel. "What's next?" she asked briskly. "We've informed the buyer. They were shocked and pretty upset with Dylan. They're ready to back us up. And I emailed them the formal letter this morning, detailing that the sale is illegal, that I'm the sole owner, and that fraud charges are on the table." He hasn't replied yet, but if I had to guess, he's going to lose his cool. I smiled inwardly, let him stew. When I finally stepped into my apartment, it felt oddly quiet. Dylan's stuff was still there, his jackets tossed over a chair, his sneakers carelessly piled by the door. But the vibe was different, like the energy had shifted. I exhaled deeply and set my suitcase down, fully aware that the showdown was coming. Sure enough, that very evening, Dylan burst in, red-faced and clutching his phone. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the letter Mia had sent. "You're telling me I can't sell the condo because it's half mine?" "No, Dylan," I replied coolly, crossing my arms. "The deed has been in my name for months. You can't sell something you don't own." He stopped, his face a mix of confusion and fury. "What are you talking about?" I grabbed the deed from a file I had set aside earlier and held it up. "After our refinance, I got the deed transferred into my name. You even signed off on it. Unless you just skimmed through the paperwork like you always do." For a moment, he said nothing. Then his face twisted into a sneer. "So you think you're so clever?" He spat. "This doesn't change anything. I already made a deal, and you're going to look like a fool when it all falls apart." I stare back at him, unblinking. "The sale is void, Dylan. The buyer knows it, and they're ready to sue if you don't return the money. And on top of that, if you spent even a dime of that deposit, you're in even more trouble." For the first time, Dylan's confidence wavered. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying," I replied steadily. "You've spent years acting like I'm too clueless to see what you're doing, but guess what? I've been watching. Now it's time for you to face the consequences." He began pacing, frustration mounting. "This is insane. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You can't just kick me out." I raised an eyebrow and said, "Actually, I can. This condo legally belongs to me. You can stick around for now only because I'm giving you a chance to figure out your next move. But let me be clear, I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few days, Dylan's anger morphed into panic. He called me repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails that alternated between pleading and threatening. Meanwhile, Mia worked behind the scenes to tie up every loose end. The buyer canceled the sale, furious that Dylan had wasted their time and money, and Mia began preparing the divorce papers. "You're in a strong position, Zoe," she told me during one of our updates. "Between the voided sale and the potential fraud charges hanging over his head, Dylan has no leverage. He'll have to cooperate if he wants to avoid even bigger problems." Her words reassured me, but also reminded me how much I had let Dylan control my life for so long. I had ignored his dismissive attitude and arrogance, convincing myself that fighting wasn't worth it. Now I saw just how much I'd sacrificed, and I was determined to take it all back. That evening, my best friend Hannah dropped by to help reorganize the apartment. We carefully boxed up Dylan's belongings, stacking them neatly in one corner of the living room. "How's he handling all this?" Hannah asked with a smirk, holding up one of his skinny ties. "Not too well," I replied, laughing despite the circumstances. "He still thinks he can talk his way out, but I'm not backing down." "Good," she said, tossing the tie into the box. "He doesn't deserve any of your space or time." I nodded, grateful for her support. For so long, I felt alone in a marriage where I carried the emotional and financial burdens while Dylan took all the credit. Now, with friends in my corner, everything felt different. The final twist in my plan came on the day Dylan brought Ava over to the apartment. I was sitting at the dining table, reviewing some papers, when they walked in like they owned the place. Ava glanced around with a smug smile, her arm looped through Dylan's. "So this is where we're staying?" she said, her tone dripping with entitlement. I stood up, heart pounding, but my resolve firm. "No, this is where Dylan stays. You, Ava, are not welcome here." Ava's smile faltered as she exchanged a shocked look with Dylan. "What is this?" he demanded, clearly rattled. "This," I said, gesturing to the apartment, "is my home. Not yours, not hers, and definitely not a crash pad after betraying me." Ava's expression went cold, and she said nothing. Dylan, however, looked like he was about to lose it. "You can't do this," he shouted. "You're being unreasonable." I met his glare steadily. "No, Dylan, what's really unreasonable is thinking you could sell my home, walk away with the cash, and expect me to just sit back. You're lucky I haven't pressed criminal charges." He lingered in the doorway, red-faced and frustrated, while Ava crossed her arms and looked increasingly uncomfortable. "This is absurd, Zoe," he pleaded. You can't just kick me out of my own home. I stepped forward, voice calm but firm. This is my home, Dylan. The deed's been in my name for months. And you remember that you signed the paperwork without even reading it, like you always do. So, no, this isn't your home anymore. Ava's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her purse as she snapped. Wait, what are you talking about? You said this was your condo and that you sold it. Dylan tried to wave her off. It's complicated. I'll handle it, he muttered. No, it's not complicated. I interjected, moving closer. You attempted to sell a property that isn't even yours. That sale is null, and right now, you don't have any ground to stand on. Ava's cool facade cracked. You mean the money you claimed you had? She asked, her voice rising. Oh my God, did you lie about that too? Ava began, but I cut her off. Let me explain, I said. Dylan tried to speak, holding up his hands in a hasty gesture, but I wasn't having it. You tried to sell our condo behind my back, thinking you could pocket the money and leave me with nothing. What you didn't realize is that I had the deed switched into my name months ago. Not only did you fail to sell it, but you also committed fraud by pretending you could. Ava's mouth opened and closed in disbelief, whispering fraud. I nodded, arms crossed, and added, yes, fraud. And I'm fully prepared to press charges if you don't pack up your things and leave by the end of today. Finally, Dylan's mask began to slip. You can't do this, Zoe, he pleaded. We've been together for 6 years. You can't just throw me out. You effectively did that the moment you took that call. You said you were divorcing me and laughed about how I'd have to find a new place. You didn't just betray me, Dylan. You tried to ruin me, so stop acting like the victim. Ava stepped back, eyes darting between us. This is insane, she muttered, clutching her purse tighter. You never told me any of this. Dylan, you said you had everything under control. He turned to her, desperation written all over his face. Ava, I can fix this. I just need... But she cut him off sharply. No, I'm not getting dragged into your mess. With that, she spun on her heel and stormed out, leaving him standing there dumbfounded. I couldn't help but smile as the door clicked shut behind her. Looks like you're on your own now, I said, turning back to Dylan. Let's discuss what comes next. He slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Zoe, please, I screwed up. I know I did, but you don't have to do this. I picked up a folder from the kitchen counter and set on the coffee table in front of him. I don't have to do this, but I will. These are the divorce papers Mia already prepared, and you should sign them quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on. He stared at the folder, his face turning pale. You really hate me that much? He whispered. I let out a bitter laugh. No, Dylan, I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. You had it all. A loving partner and a home we built together. And you threw it all away because you couldn't look past your own ego. My heart is pounding, but my decision is clear. I want you out of here by the end of today. Pack up your stuff and figure out where you'll stay. This is the last time I'm giving you any leeway. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but then stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, he mumbled. I'll go. Good, I said, walking to the door. And don't even think about trying anything else. Mia's handling everything. And the next time you cross a line, I won't hesitate to let the courts deal with you. As I opened the door, Dylan slowly rose, grabbing his coat without meeting my eyes. His footsteps were heavy with defeat. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for him, but for the life we might have had if he'd been the man I thought he was. That feeling quickly gave way to relief as I closed and locked the door with a new key. This was my home now, and no one, especially not Dylan, was going to take it away from me again. The quiet that filled the apartment after Dylan left was overwhelming. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely. The space no longer felt burdened by his presence, his entitlement, or his lies. It was just me, in the home I'd built, and a peaceful realization that I'd won. Not only against him, but against every insecurity that had ever held me back. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the emptiness where his belongings once cluttered the space. His oversized gaming chair, the framed jerseys on the walls, and that gaudy coffee table he insisted on keeping were all gone. The apartment looked brighter, cleaner, and unmistakably mine. That evening, Sophie dropped by with takeout and a bottle of wine. Is he really gone? she asked as she collapsed on the couch with an exaggerated sigh. Gone, and not coming back, I replied, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I gave him until the end of today to pack his stuff, and he didn't even fight it. Sophie raised her glass to fresh starts and well-earned victories. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling the heavy weight of the past week begin to lift, determined never to let anyone walk all over me again. Over the next several days, I began reclaiming my apartment bit by bit. I rearranged the furniture, hung up my favorite artwork in the living room, and filled the space with things that brought me joy. It wasn't just about a new look, it was about turning the condo into a reflection of who I truly was, not the person Dylan had tried to force me into being. Mia called with updates on the legal side of things. Her voice brimmed with the confidence that made me feel unstoppable. The fraud charges are off the table because the buyer decided not to pursue them, she explained, but the divorce papers are progressing. Once Dylan signs, you'll be officially free. The word free made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about shedding years of resentment, self-doubt, and feeling trapped in a relationship that never valued me. Finally, all that burden was lifting. Dylan tried reaching out a few times afterward. His messages ranged from half-hearted apologies to desperate pleas to talk things over, even accusing me of ruining his life. I left them unanswered. I wasn't going to waste energy trying to fix something that was irreparably broken. He made his choices, and now he had to deal with them. By week's end, the apartment felt like a completely transformed space. Warm, inviting, and totally mine. Sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, watching the city lights twinkle outside my window, I reflected on everything that had happened. Dylan's betrayal had been a shock, but it also served as a wake-up call. For too long, I believed I didn't deserve better, that I had to settle for the scraps of respect he threw my way. Now, I knew my worth. I wasn't just taking back my condo, I was reclaiming my life. A month later, everything felt completely different. The apartment wasn't unrecognizable because I'd done a major overhaul, but because its atmosphere had changed. It reflected me, my tastes, my personality, and my newfound independence. Without Dylan's clutter and overbearing presence, the space felt lighter and freer. The divorce was moving along without any drama. Mia had handled every detail meticulously, leaving Dylan no chance to argue. He signed the papers almost without resistance, probably realizing he had no real leverage. There was no grand showdown or emotional pleas, just a cold, clean break that was as bittersweet as it was satisfying. One day, while sifting through some old papers, I found a photo of Dylan and me from our early days together. We were smiling, arms around each other, full of hope and promise. I stared at it, letting the memories wash over me, reminding me of the good times when I truly believed we were building a future together. But those moments were long gone, overshadowed by years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. I tucked the photo into an envelope and stored it away in a drawer. It wasn't something I wanted to display, yet I wasn't ready to discard it completely. It was part of my past, but it no longer defined who I was. Sophie and I later celebrated the finalization of the divorce over dinner and drinks at a trendy rooftop bar downtown. "You're glowing," she said, raising her cocktail in a toast. "Single life really suits you." I laughed, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. "It's not about being single," I said. "It's about having the freedom to live on my own terms for the first time." We toasted to that, and as the night wore on, a deep sense of pride swelled within me. I had faced one of the toughest challenges of my life and emerged stronger. I wasn't merely surviving, I was thriving. Back at home, I began planning for what came next. My apartment had become more than just a shelter. It was a symbol of everything I'd reclaimed. I knew I wouldn't live there forever. Someday, I'd move on to a new place, free of the lingering shadows of my past with Dylan. Until then, I was determined to enjoy every moment in the space I had fought so hard to secure. That night, as I curled up on the couch, a deep sense of peace washed over me. I remembered how Dylan had laughed during that phone call, so sure he'd won, and I couldn't help but smile. His arrogance had been his downfall, and my quiet strength had been my saving grace. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was in charge, where I chose happiness on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.